Welcome back to 93 Theory and Practice. No, I'm just kidding, guys. I'm fucking ridiculous if that's how I did these podcasts. So, welcome back, guys. So happy to have you again. Another beautiful morning here in Texas. Or, if you want to say in the realm of Tex. So, today, we're gonna get weird. And what I mean by that is, we're gonna talk about, basically, spiritual practice, magical practice, ritual. So we've touched, so far, in our previous podcasts, we've touched on duality, we've touched on a little bit of Kabbalah, and we've touched on the elements. Now, if you've also watched the or listened to the podcast where I did an interview, or the two interviews that I did, in a sense, I think they're actually more, they turned out to be more just teaching, me having someone there teaching them, or just talking a lot as they listened and had maybe a few questions or comments. But if you watch those, I went over some magical theory and some meditative practice, some of which are pretty easy. You can get started yourself if you don't already have a practice. But we kind of touched on, magical theory in a sense. But I wanted to talk about more the more creative side of it. So we've talked a lot about reducing these things down to practical applications, I guess, or reducing them down to very easily understood terms. So in a sense, we took the four elements and we reduced them down to psychological conditions or physical conditions in nature. So we basically made them more material for us so that we can understand and comprehend them. But I feel it's important to also stress or to also display the more magical view of it. Essentially, when you're dealing with these things, you're dealing with subconscious forces. You want to be able to not only affect your current generalized psychology, or your current mode of consciousness. It's very important to be able to have control of that on a minute-to-minute basis. To be able to monitor yourself all day long and be self-aware, and then make certain adjustments using whatever techniques you see fit. But in a sense, that's just a more in-depth way of just what we all should be doing naturally. Essentially, self-awareness and self-moderation and modification is just an innate tendency we should all have from moment to moment, without necessarily even having any kind of magical implication to that. It's just when you attribute certain times of the day to certain planetary forces or astrological forces, when you attribute certain periods of larger periods of time to astrological forces or moon phases, and then you attribute certain importances, I don't know, I'm having a very difficult time talking today, I apologize, guys. Certain importances, if that's even a word, to those times, and then you also do certain things. I mean, it's a good way of categorizing, structuralizing your environment so that you can, be more effective, I guess, in that way. But you have to understand that we do these things also to contact something higher. That something higher, of course, being the higher spiritual or elemental forces. Essentially, we just want to contact spirit. So, when I speak about we're going to get weird, basically I want to talk openly about these kind of things. And I see I tend to get into a tendency of being somewhat apologetic about the whole nomenclature of occultism. That it's not in any way, I hope, as a way of trying to reduce these things down and then also lose their value. There is a value, I believe, in the occult aspect of occultism. The kind of weird, now I don't mean in a sense supernatural or well, a little bit supernatural, but what's that other word? Superstitious. I don't want to inject any of the superstitions of occultism, because those are just plays on man's fears, of which you shouldn't give any power to fear. You should control that. But in a sense, you should still, when you invoke that feeling of awe, of mystery, of wonder, when your mind, your conscious mind, can't grasp or comprehend something, like we discussed prior in other podcasts, your brain has to give structure to that. So in some form, it will attach importance, a symbol, and structure. It will crystallize an idea or a thing, or an idea about a thing, so that essentially you can use it. I can't remember the other word. Interact with it, so that you can interact with your environment. Your brain shapes your environment constantly. The speed of light, even faster. Basically, so that you can interact with it and have being and have will and survive. The more you can interact and understand your environment, the more chance you have of surviving and being in more control of that and shaping the environment. That's the whole purpose of the brain, is we're in this physical apparatus as a body, but we have to have consciousness to have willed trajectory, evolution. So we have this extra sense of awareness. This extra sense of awareness is our consciousness. It's this soul. Now, like I said, we're getting kind of weird and spiritual, but remember, these things do have correlations. Now, correlations, they're not exact representations, and they're not equals, but they're equal in the sense as you can correlate and intellectually understand this on some level. So the soul, of course, will have other implications to other things. Even within the realm of spiritual thought, the soul has many meanings. But when we're talking about the soul, we're talking about the more spiritual aspect of the body, the more etheric, in a sense. So we don't want to dilute this language, in a sense, at least in this podcast. We're going to have fun today, guys. This is fun. We're having a fun day. So, where was I going with that? So, either way, these subjective truths that we experience in occultism, we understand them as being subjective, but we should also understand that these things, they are subjective. They're not objective truths, therefore these shouldn't be things you imply on people. So, in your practices, anyone that's had some sort of spiritual practice eventually will probably have some sort of minute spiritual awakening, if not a full spiritual awakening. So regardless of what tradition you belong to, like I know in the Muslim faith, you have they call the Sufis, who have spiritual practices. I know they have what's called the whirling dervishes, which they invoke a trance state using dance and chant. That's really cool, man. That's a way of ascending past the knowable. So when you are consciously creating unknowable phenomenon, in a sense, when you're consciously doing things that don't speak on a rational level, in a sense, but they speak only like on a subconscious, irrational level, what you're doing is you're speaking to the subconscious patterns, the subconscious neural pathways, the subconscious aspects of yourself, the shadow self. You're training the shadow self. You're injecting little bits of light. So when we do these elemental rituals, which I guess maybe we can go into in this podcast, we do some sort of elemental ritual. What we are doing is injecting light in the form of that element. So remember, everything refers back to light. So in the whole concept of the sun is the pure energy of spirituality, so it's spiritually pure in its most highest aspect in Kether, but then it splits off into 4 elements. This is when we look at the tarot, it's the 4 aces, the wands, the cups, the daggers or knives, and the discs or pentacles. So it becomes knowable as the 4, or at least in elemental form. So whenever we're doing an elemental ritual, we're of course trying to contact spirit. We're trying to draw from Kether. We are drawing from Kether, but it's ramified. It's turned into 4 forces, and then from there you can further turn it into 7 forces, and then from there into 12 forces, or vice versa, 12 and then 7, however you want to view it. So, I mean, essentially that's how it ramifies down, you know, down the tree or down the scheme of hierarchy. But when we do this, we're trying to contact light, and we're trying to inject light into a darkened realm. So this darkened realm is like our lunar body. It's in a sense, kind of like the astral realm. The astral realm being the dark realm. So it starts off dark. You close your eyes, you try and calm the body, calm the mind, and relax, and then try and, in a sense, slip into this relaxed, altered state. I believe it's, if you want to think brainwaves, I think it's the alpha state. You're trying to get into an alpha brainwave state, I think. But in a sense, you're stilling all the physical forces of your body, and then you start off dark. Of course, every time you close your eyes, you don't, well, maybe some people, but essentially you close your eyes, you just see darkness. Once the little flickers and flecks of just particles, you know, that still retain a little bit of phos, a little bit of light. Once those die off, and then your vision is just clear. Essentially, it's just darkness. But then you build this reality. It either reveals itself to you, or you project it into this blackness, and that essentially becomes the astral or etheric realm. Now, of course, etheric and astral don't mean the same thing, but they're essentially kind of close to each other. Etheric, you can kind of think of like, here's physical realm, a little bit below is like the sub-astral / etheric realm, and then above the physical, like just kind of sandwiched above, is like more of the higher pure astral, I guess. That's both sandwiched and encapsulated like a yolk and an egg by an astral goo, which is preform, which starts in mind, but also in the preform of space. But either way, so this shadow realm, in a sense, has its correlation to, you can kind of think of it like Yesod. It's the foundational, it's the lunar realm, but I think the moon is, in a sense, the nighttime sun. It is, during the night, the brightness of the moon basically is the reflected light of the sun. So the moon becomes known and illuminated because there's light consciousness being shown in it. So that's kind of like an allegory to the injection of light, or the invocation of some sort of energy into your lunar realm, into your subconscious realm, or if you want to even think of it like your subconscious in the sense of like primal instinctual, because remember, Yesod is also, if you look on the scheme of the tree of life on the body of man, but also in a sense kind of where the moon correlates as far as energetically to the body. It's right around those core genital areas, not quite the lowest one, which is Malkuth, which would be more around the anus or some sort of gooch area, and then extends down into the ground as our primal link to Mother Earth. But but essentially Yesod is fixed in the realm of our genitalia, our reproductive, so our instinctual, subconscious, reproductive, primal, instinctual kind of self resides there, in a sense. But when we inject light down into it, it becomes illuminated, and we can kind of see into that realm. When it's darkened, we don't have light, that realm essentially has the power. It's formlessness, no light, so essentially that formlessness creates the shades and terrors of night and darkness. But when we do these rituals, in a sense, when we inject that light, so say for instance you have this darkened realm where the moon only resides, so it's got lots of waters and forests, and it's constantly got a night sky with maybe stars, maybe not, and then every 18 days or something like that, 14 days, I forget, it becomes illuminated, and you have light in the realm, and you can get kind of reflections of that light form objects. Now, of course, this is a realm of darkness, so the objects we see are just plays of light. So they are the subconscious ramifications of our actions and thoughts and desires. So they can take on very gaseous and monstrous forms, but also some quite comical. Basically what I'm trying to say here is when we do our elemental rituals, we have positive ramifications and negative ramifications. So when you want to become more fiery, so you say you do a pentagram ritual, and you will invoke fire into your sphere of influence, into yourself. So fire from outside your circle, using the pentagram to draw it into your circle in a controlled manner. So you're essentially trying to shake things up on that elemental level by essentially injecting fire and force into your entire being. So essentially, if you want to view this on like a tree of life scheme, so you have this tree superimposed on your body. Now, of course, there is no such thing as a physical tree of energy on your body. It's more of a way to think of energy and how it plays within your physical being and how that has correspondence to the larger realm. Much in the same way, like in New Age theology, you'd have the chakras on the body, or in a more, I think, like a Chinese sense, you would have these chi points or little chakras in the body that would be energy centers, and then those would have correspondence to energy centers on the earth, so like chakras on the earth or grid forces on the earth, and then that would have correspondence to astrological points in the cosmos, which would inject energy, blah blah blah. But either way, it's kind of the same thing. It's just a way of correlating your own body and how your body functions and how your psyche functions and how your spirit functions to how everything else functions, so that you no longer view yourself as being separate. Now, you are unique, but not separate. That's kind of the differentiation between individualism and basically being unique within a collective structure. Uniqueness implies you have a specific purpose, a specific set of skills that you were born with, and those make you special and unique in a good way, because without you, perhaps that funnel of energy, that light of pure being, would not have a way of revealing itself had it not been you. Those are causing weird ways you can view that, but essentially what you are is like a perfect vessel for manifesting light at any given moment. It's your own conscious ability to recognize that and then follow through with the process that is kind of the problem. But when we do these elemental rituals, we're we're playing with that. We're playing with our own forces, our own dark forces. So this entire tree, when we do an elemental ritual, we're injecting fire into the whole thing. We're igniting those forces. Now, of course, on a conscious energetic level, you feel that almost immediately after the ritual. That's the observant result, is I feel hotter, or I feel colder, or I have these sorts of thoughts, or these sorts of phenomenon I recognized in my environment, or whatever you have it, whatever you observe in this play. This ritual essentially is the fiery force being injected on your consciousness, your awakened consciousness, the solar aspect of yourself. And then of course you're using a higher form to deduce more spiritual meanings, so you're using your higher consciousness as well, but you're using your solar forces. Now what comes after that, in a sense, as your physical forces settle and fall down, as they dilute or coagulate down into the waters of your being, once the forces drip from the top down to the bottom, when they hit Yesod, in a sense, they hit your subconscious, your instinctual elemental forces. This is where you feel the ramifications of your ritual. This is where you inject the dream substances, of which, as you sleep, you encounter the elemental beings that give you messages in the nighttime lunar realm. So, but basically what it is you're when you do something and you physically change your consciousness, you're physically changing the chemistry of your body. You're changing the spirits, in a sense, within you. And that has a short-term ramification and also a long-term ramification. Which the watery aspect of the ritual, remember, even though you're doing a fire ritual, you're still affecting 4 quadrants, and those 4 quadrants are ruled by 4 elements. So even when you're injecting fire into the west, you are still injecting it into a watery realm, in a sense. So that has an implication. Same thing with earth. So first, of course, you get the more immediate ramifications in the form of fire and air, your thoughts and what you immediately feel, or what has been inflamed within you upon completion of the ritual. But then you have the feeling of that once those feelings and thoughts kind of condense down, or those, I say feelings, but I think hopefully you understand. Once that settles into your waters, either it spoils the waters or sweetens the waters, and then you will experience the ramification of that. And that gives you kind of light or insight into how balanced your fire was in that quadrant when you injected it. Then, lastly, I should say lastly, really weird. But then, lastly, you experience the physical ramification of doing that, basically what you've now physically become, what you physically created, the result of that ritual in form of actions or concrete projects. So that's the physical ramification. But see, you're affecting all the elements of your body. You're affecting all the spheres of your tree in your body. But everything condenses down into Yesod, into the foundational realm. And then from there, it drips down like dew or blood, which then feeds the life of the earth and creates new growths, fertilizes the earth, the dead material of our body, to create new growths. Those new growths are basically what you want to say the physical ramifications of the ritual or the action. There will always be, so here's a little secret, guys. If you do a ritual and you, well, even just practicing ritual, you're doing something on a subconscious level, or even, well, you start off, of course, everything starts off consciously. But as it manifests down to a subconscious level, there's always going to be a physical ramification of that, some physical feeling, ease or dis-ease. You're gonna get some sort of action out of that. Luckily, in most cases, that action is just gas. Or an upset stomach, or what have you, or a bad dream, or whatever. It's or a bad mood, or a good mood, or a good dream. It's regardless, but it's gonna have some sort of action, more or less physical. Less physical in the sense of like what I just mentioned, or more physical in the creation of something, or the initiation into something. So let's go ahead and jump into like basically these elemental rituals. So of course we have the pentagram rituals. The pentagram rituals are more commonly known as the lesser banishing and invoking ritual of the pentagram, and then the greater or supreme banishing and invoking ritual of the pentagram. So we're going to focus just on the lessers. Not that in the grand scheme of things it matters whether or not it's lesser or greater. What makes one lesser and one greater is just the amount of content in one, and whether or not it involves invoking or banishing spirit. Now that's basically the main difference, I think, between the lesser and greater. Banishing or invoking rituals is the greater has the 5th element of spirit as a force. So in each quadrant you are also invoking or banishing an active or passive aspect of spirit. So spirit, as we know, each pentagram has its own way of drawing. We're not going to get into that because it's not particularly important. At least in just understanding the grand scheme of it. I guess what I can do is I'll do a video or series of videos of which I'll go step by step through the pentagram ritual, and then probably overlay the theory and ideas behind it, so that as you physically do the ritual and gain insight into its movements, we'll kind of talk about what each word means, what each symbol, pentagram, step, all these things, basically what they account to. So that just helps you with as far as the mental, the astral, and the spiritual acts that you're doing. But essentially in the pentagram rituals, certain ways of drawing the pentagrams, which more or less isn't necessarily important. But, so you have these phases in the ritual. So we're speaking of lesser, so we're not going to have spirit tapping here. Essentially, we're dealing with 5, so it's the pentagram, so we're dealing with the microcosm. In dealing with the microcosm, we're dealing with microcosmic forces. So these are known or external forces. Remember, the macrocosmic forces, in a sense, are those greater forces. So as symbolized by, remember, everything's like an onion. So the heavens are symbolized as the macrocosm. So that's the realm of the 6. Our known universe is the microcosm, the realm of the 5, of which we have our being in. The internal realm is, in a sense, the macrocosm to our external being, or the microcosm to our external being. But in a sense, if everything's an onion, so man is in the middle, okay? He's in a sense, if the universe is the macro, the grand realm, then the small realm compared to that would be the realm of which man inhabits. So the next realm would be another macrocosm. So it would go macro, micro, macro, micro. So our internal realm has correspondence to the macrocosm. Our microcosm has correspondence to our macro. So remember, this is the core of Hermetic belief. As above, so below. As within, so without. Kethers and Malkuth, but in a different manner. So we do these rituals. We invoke, we banish, but it always starts with the tapping of spiritual source, or at least the attempt of that. So we'll do videos and we'll get into that, into the theory. Remember, this is theory and practice, so we'll get into the theory and the practice. But right now, we're just talking about theory. So the way basically a banishing ritual works is you have what's called the Kabbalistic cross. The lesser banish ritual starts off with the Kabbalistic cross, which is basically forming a cross on the body and trying to contact the highest aspect of spirit, or invoking the highest aspect of spirit as an equilibrating force on your body. If you want to do that in the Christian sense, when you make a cross on the body, you're basically calling down a blessing. You're calling down the blessing of God, the purifying force of God, to basically, in a sense, imprint you with the sign of the cross, with what the cross represents, In our sense, in a magical sense, the cross represents the 4 elements converging together to reveal spirit. So we understand that, remember, on the tree of life, we have the middle pillar of air, with fire and water on opposite ends, but earth being the ultimate manifestation at the very bottom of the airy pillar. Same thing when we're doing our Kabbalistic cross, we're acknowledging the tree of life on our body and also acknowledging the convergence of those forces into one spiritual force. So we take the spiritual air of Keter, which is because air is the least material in a sense, but it shares in the nature. So think of it this way: fire and water are polar opposites. Both are like equally divine. They're supernal elements. They're core elements. But you have the third force of air, which is the result of those two things, but also, in a sense, kind of the preform of those two things, the ramification of those two things. Because remember, hot and dry, cold and moist. You have air, which is hot and moist, or warm and moist. So it shares in those natures and rectifies those two natures. So the middle pillar, being the rectification of those two things, basically that's our closest to spirit we can get, in a sense. So we draw that spiritual air down into our physical earth, and then that physical earth generates the polarities. So that spirit earth generates the first. Okay, we had a pause on the video. So that spiritual air that we're invoking from Kether becomes spiritual earth, our physical reality here. We bring that back up, Vigabura, Vigadula. Essentially fire and water are then the two balancing forces of that channel of manifestation. And then we get our central core of spirit. That's where we get the Leolam forever. That is the eternal cycle of the elements portraying out. But what we're trying to do is not necessarily give the eternal cycle of manifestation, but the eternal cycle of demanifestation, of revealing of spirit. Remember, in the Hermetic belief, in this whole system, we are unveiling a flower. We're essentially trying to create a rose. We're unveiling the rose, the true nature of man. So, in a sense, we're converging these four elements in the form of the cross, linked to the Kabbalistic tree of life within our body. We're trying to say that within my solar center, within the ray of light, so spiritual light in Kether, I am that ray. I am a ray of that spiritual light. Then within that truth is the truth of the four pieces of me, my left, my right, my higher, and my lower forces. Essentially my left brain, my right brain, my higher cortex, and my lower animal cortex, if you want to think of it that way. But I don't know why. I said we weren't going to get into this kind of stuff, but we are. Sorry. For some reason I can't separate. It's that whole balance a thought against its opposite, which is if something's really spiritual, balance against something that makes it very mundane. But we come to understand that this is kind of like the four convergences of our energies bring this into being. Then we say, Laolam Amen, is we want this to carry on. This is the trajectory of our will. We're making the conscious decision to establish this in this plane as our will, using the four directions of our own body. Well, now we've equilibrated the little macrocosm within us that has correspondence to the microcosm, which is why we use the tree of life as the diagram for that. That's what links us to everything. That's the knowable correspondence that we use to know the universe and then make effects in it, because we have like a system, a science. The tree of life is like a system or a diagram or a science that we use to correspond greater truths to lesser truths. So our greater environment to our lesser environment, our psyche to our unconscious. So we do this, the equilibrization of ourselves, so that we make a firm foundation now. We've set, essentially, our first yesod, our first convergence of energies in the pursuit of spirit. Then we move on to the formal pentagram invocations or banishings. So we start, of course, traditionally in the east, in air, just like when we started our invocation here, we started in air. Now, of course, if we were to follow that, we would go counterclockwise. But remember, okay. So then we start our banishing ritual formal, or invoking ritual formal. So these, of course, have directions: clockwise to invoke, counterclockwise to banish. Although traditionally, you will just go clockwise regardless, because you're still trying to, you are, in a sense, so whenever you're doing a ritual, in my mind, whenever you're doing a ritual purely based on one element, then you use your directions of clockwise to invoke, counterclockwise to banish. But when you're doing a generalized ritual, so a generalized banishing or invoking ritual of which you're just using all the elements, then I would think it's easily understood to just go the direction clockwise regardless, because the whole purpose is to count, to inject spirit, or to manifest spirit, or touch spirit. So if you're banishing, you're pushing the elements within yourself, or the elements within your sphere of influence out. You're basically trying to reveal spirit by removing things. Whereas when you're invoking, you're trying to reveal spirit by basically building a perfect foundation for it, a perfect vessel of that spirit, a perfect talisman. Elemental talisman being the energies of which you've invoked. You're trying to reveal spirit by having equilibrated force. So either all four elements are a good 25%, or all four elements are a good 0. Essentially, you're just trying to make level. We lost camera 2. Hey, technology, what can you do? But we've touched on this before. Essentially, our elemental rituals are just ways of revealing things about ourselves, or just completely negating the self and contacting truth. So in the pentagram rituals, we either invoke or banish to try and contact spirit, and we want to establish that. We want to make... Now, remember I said you could do these things on a very conscious basis. So of course, as you do the ritual, you're actively doing these pentagrams. There's a lot involved just mentally. So just consciously and subconsciously that you're doing. You're trying to well up feelings, emotions. You're drawing on very archetypal concepts. You're doing these very occult movements and poses and things like that. It all plays very deeply on your deep psyche and your subconscious. But you're also using your consciousness very, very actively as well, because it takes a lot of brain force to hold on to images, to formulate things mentally and then conceptualize them physically, in a sense. It takes a lot. You're basically running on all four engines, in a sense. So you want to establish that as an ongoing current, or you want to bring in a higher form of understanding. So in a sense, in the absence of elemental force, there's the spiritual force. There's the ace of that force. The next knowable ramification is the dualistic form of ramification. So in the tarot, it would be the twos. In a sense, your archangels, they're not attributed to the twos, but in a sense, your archangels are like that. Whereas you have Atziluth, you have the pure elemental force. So when you push away fire in the south, and there's like no fire left, there's that void of fire. That void of fire is like spirit. It's like the ace. What comes out of that void, in a sense, that you can understand and comprehend, is the archangel force, or at least your best ability to comprehend what the purest form of that aspect is, in a noble, communicating kind of a way, would be an archangel, in a sense, symbolized by an archangel. Or when you invoke fire into its full, in that quarter, 100%, or 25% in the grand scheme, you're essentially revealing its purest manifested aspect. So that archangel would then be represented as that purest manifested aspect. But even then is a dualistic view, because you have the invoked force of the archangel, blah, blah, blah. Either way, it's the same archangel, but it's different ways of basically having that form. Remember, when you're doing astral vision, you're using an elemental force to create this thing. You're giving it life through some sort of medium, some sort of force. So here would be the fire. The absence of fire, the vortex of fire, would be the force of which you would create the archangel in a banishing ritual. And then the excess of fire would be the force of which you would create the archangel in an invocation ritual, at least in my idea of the whole conception of things, which may just be an overcomplication. But once the archangels are established in each quarter, of course you have Raphael in the east for air, Michael in the south for fire, Gabriel in the west for water, and Uriel in the north for earth. Now, other traditions will flip Raphael and Michael. Other traditions will put Michael in the east for the solar fire, and they will put Raphael in the south for some other reason. I don't know. Or vice versa. Though the different attributions for different systems, although in the most traditional way, it's basically the way that I originally described. Even in the Thelemic system, it's in the Star Ruby, the elemental attributions are actually at times a bit different. But either way, we're speaking of the lesser banishing ritual, so we're sticking with the traditional stuff. We start off traditional, even though this is the new Aeon, and we but essentially a new Aeon, we've been given a new and improved pentagram ritual, but it's good to start a good foundation. Start where we've come from, learn about it, practice it, and then that way it gives you a better understanding jumping off into the newer Aeon technologies. So after we've established these archangels in the quarters as representing kind of those... remember, the archangels astrologically, when we're invoking them in our pentagrams, in a sense, they are they are those fixed cubic signs of the zodiac. So in the south, we use Leo as the fixed sign of fire. We use Scorpio as the fixed sign of water, so on and so forth. So they become the fixed concepts of element in those quarters. So essentially, remember, like the Bible teaches us, when you banish demons from someone, it's like a room of which you've just cleaned up, but if you just leave it unattended, all sorts of people will go in and start living in there. Unclean spirits will go and occupy. Nature abhors a vacuum, basically. If you banish, you must fill that space with something, so you fill it with your highest concept, or you fill it with a talisman that's going to inject or invoke or attract the type of force of which you want. So you use the sign of Leo as fixed fire because you just want pure elemental fixed fire. You don't want to decrease in fire, you don't want to necessarily increase in fire, you just want fire in its most stable form, so that stability becomes a foundation of which you can act on. In a sense, your cup isn't draining and it isn't overflowing, it's just nice and full. So once you've done that, you then you contact spirit again. You do you reestablish your universe. So remember, when you've banished, you've completely annihilated, in a sense, your universe. The four elements, if you've done it successfully, the four elements of your universe have now been banished or obliterated. If you've invoked, you have overtaken your universe and refilled it, basically. You've taken its deficits and filled it in so that now it's nice and flat and fat and invoked with power. But you want to reestablish your kingdom. So you have your four rulers, your four gates, your four channels, your four totems in the quarters, and now you want to reestablish your kingdom, your Malkuth. So you contact air again. You have a better way. So remember, when you first contacted spirit in the beginning, you were doing it as your lesser self, as your magical self, but the magical self before the equilibrization of your universe. Now you're doing it again as your equilibrated self. You're the same person, but something's changed. So you're doing the same contact as spirit with something changed. Hopefully, the result is the contact with that spirit comes easier. When you do it again, it takes maybe not as long, and the feeling and force of it seems to be a little bit more manifest. You know what I mean? There's a little bit that goes into it that reveals that maybe something happened here. I've equilibrated this. And then you still in calm. Either you can move forward and do your hexagram rituals to complete the circuit of macro and micro, or you can rest in the macrocosmic conditions that you have created. So, yeah. Let's move on. We've touched a little bit on that. Let's go ahead and move on to our tarot reading. I'll be right back. Oh, sorry, Chica. So if y'all have noticed, I'm wearing like what seems to be kind of like a costume. This is one. The pentagram makes it cool and mystical, man. No, this is just one of the robe things I wear. I don't know. I felt like looking like a Jedi today. So, let's move forward. I recently attempted a new video format, like something to add as extra content of tarot storytelling. So, kind of like a build-up off of the first operation in Crowley's Thought Tarot, like when he tells you how to do readings or examples of readings. The first operation is you choose a significator that represents the person you're giving the reading for, and then you build a story based off of like some cards. I was basically going to try and do that and try and come up with interesting stories based off of the correspondence of the cards. But what I've come to find out that it's probably something be better to be done with someone else, because my just the way my brain works, it generates a story, but it goes through a fuck ton of correspondence before it does. It turns into me just rattling off stupid correspondence in a what I'm guessing is a nervous attempt to try and extrapolate meaning. Basically, I viewed it as a good opportunity to further deepen my understanding of the correspondence in the cards, but perhaps not a good way to make it entertaining quite yet. I guess a very select few of people would probably enjoy listening to me ramble on for longer than I do, I guess. So, let's go ahead and invoke our highest conception of spirit. We got the Chariot card. The Chariot card represents, at least to me, well, at least the letter Chet. It's the container of life. The Chariot card is represented in the astrological sign of Cancer. Cancer being kind of like the shell or the container of life. We know like Cancerian people tend to be very, on the outside, have rough external demeanors, shells, but on the inside, they are gooey and soft like crabs. They're emotional people. They're very caring people. In the same sense, this represents all of us, in the sense our external aspects to ourselves. The armor of which we take on is, in a sense, the shells, the complexes which we use to protect our internal pure force. So in a sense, it's like our complexes and virtues are the armor of which we encapsulate our soul. Our soul being our pure self, or an aspect of our pure self. So we learn that we have many souls, we have many bodies. We have, like we said, each realm of the tree of life, it has its own little body, in a sense, correlated to it. That's in your physical body. Each element, in a sense, has a body, in a sense. These are just levels of being within your own being. Chet would represent each one of those levels of being, each layer of the soul as a whole, but ultimately the whole idea of that, which is Chet being the word Hai, Chet, Yod, it's the letter for life or to live. The Yod is that life force. The Yod is that little flame, the seed. But the seed needs a container, a vessel, a medium in which to grow and express itself. That is the Chet, the vessel, the external force. So think of it, the Yod is your central source. Yod, knowable, is your monad, your Jupiter. It has its beginning in Chokmah, the eternal Father, who has his link in Keter, the very tip of the Yod, but the physical manifestation of that, the very beginning of that, is found in the Yod, or in a sense the monad, in you, which is like the Jupiter, the Chesed. That spark in you, when it manifests from 4 down to 10, takes on various forms and structures, and its physical manifestation is basically the perfect encapsulator and protector of that internal force. So you would think of it in a sense, the Yod in this card, Yod He Vav He. The Yod would be the internal force of what's inside this guy, and then the He Vav He would be the external forces that encapsulate himself. So psychologically, that would be the complexes and virtues that we take on that encapsulate little monads of our soul, of our true spirit, so of truth. So Chet, also, you can kind of see, also has the 4 caribs, or the 4, oh God, I can't remember. But either way, 4 archetypes of elements. They represent, of course, the archangels, also the 4 letters of the name, Yod He Vav He, the 4 elements, these right here. So of course, when I told you, so like Hesed being the number 4, he represents, of course, also Yod He Vav He, the monad, but also the demiurge. The demiurge represents the monad who does not understand himself. The monad as truth, as Jupiter, as the Sphinx, in a sense, is the one who does accept himself, accept his conditions, and then moves past that, in a sense. But that's represented on here. That's the foundation. Now remember, foundation is also Yesod. So there's the correlation to our unconscious self. You have the conscious monad of self, which is ego, and then you have the unconscious monad of self, which is our lunar aspect, or unconscious, or our lunar ego, our alter ego, in a sense. That is also represented by these 4 elements. Remember, the Yesod is the realm of the 4 foundational elements before they become manifest in Malkuth. So you have that play there. So this kind of represents that play as well. So here we see the correlation of our mental complexes and then what that physically manifests in us. So remember, you can generally, you can't really read a book, judge a book by its cover, but you can get a lot of information about a book by its cover, i.e. its title, how thick it is. You know what I mean? You can still extrapolate meaning from the appearance of things. Now, when you draw ultimate conclusions on the appearance of things, that's illusion. But it doesn't mean there isn't data there. We set foundations through these perceptions. This card basically represents the ultimate manifestation of those perceptions as varying levels of protection for our inner soul. So either we form complexes, we form these kind of things in our psyche to protect what we feel we are, what we feel is vulnerable. Like a crab, we have this vulnerable, gushy internal center, and we form this shell on the outside to protect that. So either our complexes serve that purpose, or like a virtue serves the same purpose, to protect that. The difference is a virtue generally allows that inner quality to shine forth. A virtue symbolizes that internal quality, so you have a radiant form of armor, whereas a complex or a deficit, in a sense, will be a grotesque form, which seems ill-fitting, but still protects. So it would have like spikes and shit all over it, and like magma coming out of it, whereas ultimately you would have this nice golden armor. But essentially this symbolizes that thing, I think, the building up of our external forces, the building up of our subtle bodies, those subtle virtues or complexes that we invoke or banish within ourselves energetically to then form a new foundation of which to work. So I think what this is teaching us is, let's focus on our foundational energies, our four aspects here. So, yeah, once again, I just go over the correspondence and go deeper into the card. I don't really have a generalized meaning, other than let's try and tap deep. Let's tap spirit. Let's tap our monad. Let's get to know our monad. And then let's reshape ourselves using, hopefully, these teachings we're doing now with this elemental equilibrization teachings through ritual. Let's hope that we encounter that truth in spirit and reshape ourselves. Give us new armor, new skin. All right, guys. It's been great. As always, please like and subscribe if you like this for more. And yeah, do what thou wilt, should be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will. All right, peace, guys.